one of the book club program specialists coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Let us know where you're from in the YouTube comments. If you have trouble commenting, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Trauma Research Foundation YouTube channel. As you settle in, I'd like to tell you about TRF and outline a little of what you can expect from today's event. The Trauma Research Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to bringing together a community of clinicians, researchers, and educators to support finding and implementing approaches to help those whose lives are affected by trauma heal. Our book club is currently entering its second year, and it's been a wonderful experience so far. Our growing team has been continually learning how to create the best experience for both panelists and our streaming audience. In this series, we have two new moderators to facilitate this discussion, Atra Tarfa and Ronnie Ang, who you will meet shortly. Today's session is the fourth episode of the six-part series. Each week brings together as many as 15 panelists to discuss The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. During the final episode on Thursday, March 30th, the author will join our conversation for a live Q&A session, and I'm sure you won't want to miss it. So sorry if you can hear my neighbor. We invite our virtual community to participate in the discussion. Feel free to use the YouTube chat function to share your comments throughout the session. Our team at TRF will all be tuning in with you, and we'll be sharing some comments after each discussion question. If you have trouble commenting, make sure that you, again, are subscribed to the Trauma Research Foundation YouTube channel. Also, please note that this discussion is not a substitute for, nor does it replace professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any concerns or questions about your health, you should always consult a physician or other healthcare professional in the mental health field. All right, so moving on, we'll be sharing information about each panelist as they respond to their first question. Panelists are invited to apply from anywhere in the world and from every background. We truly welcome voices representing a diversity of experiences and thoughts. If you have any interest in participating as a panelist during episodes 5, I guess the next episode 5, we will provide the application at the end of this discussion in the YouTube chat. We'll select panelists for our final episode from the list of panelists who participated in the first 5 episodes. Okay, so to help ground us in this conversation, we're happy to offer a study guide as a companion to your reading. Please download the study guide from the link in the chat. There's a lot of work, and also there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that time, attention, and care. I'm excited to introduce the TRF team that makes this production possible. So Pat, our media manager, Connor, our media specialist, Laura, our programs manager, myself, and my amazing colleague and partner in this program, Liz, each of us program specialists. And now to introduce our book club moderators, Ronnie Ang and Atra Tarfa. So without further ado, our first moderator, Atra Tarfa, is a certified trauma recovery coach supervisory level with the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches. She's a board member of PATH, a program to recover from addiction and its underlying trauma utilizing an internal family systems informed approach. As a trauma survivor herself, Atra founded Compassionate Coaching for Complex Trauma to support other survivors and serves as a 2-term elected district supervisor where she brings a self-led trauma-informed voice to local policy. She enjoys spending time eating the food of her mother's country, Thailand, and is always up for an adventure. Our second moderator, Ronnie Ang, is an EMDR and expressive arts play therapist, a group facilitator certified by the Trauma Healing Institute, and the president-elect of the American Counseling Association in New York. He's a community advocate on the board of a 501c3 nonprofit focusing on the inner city, where his mission is to empower marginalized children against intergenerational and racial trauma, as well as internalized oppression and vicarious trauma. He has also lived on 3 continents and is often invited to speak on the biopsychosocial impact of spiritual health and vice versa by local leadership around the world. Currently, Ronnie is writing a PhD dissertation on purpose-filled worldviews and other post-traumatic growth factors that strengthen resiliency and hardiness for military families and international workers with third culture kids in dangerous environments. Thank you for being here in support of this community. Atra and Ronnie, take it away.
Thank you, Emma. Well, today we will discuss part 4, the imprint of trauma from The Body Keeps the Score. In chapters 11 through 12 of the book, we learn about traumatic memory and how culture shapes the expression of traumatic stress. So, Ronnie, let's get started with question number 1.
Thank you, Atra. Actually, before we do that, why don't we do some wellness recommendations?
Oh, I had that blocked. Yes, please, let's.
Yeah. Do you want to do that or shall I?
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I did that last week.
Yes, wonderful. So, everybody, we're going to be going over material that is certainly challenging. And we want to make sure that everybody's aware that you can and should be aware that not only the topics difficult to learn from a theoretical standpoint, but they can be triggering for yourselves, as we are all the people who suffer in this broken world. So feel free to take a pause if you are in need and you need to take care of yourself, because self-care is very important. So whether it's just taking a break, 5 minutes here or there, getting a drink of water, stretching, doing some deep breathing, or name your senses, relax into the present moment, or just saying a prayer silently in your heart. I think it's very important for us to ground ourselves. So keep that in mind and know that we're all doing that at the same time, moderators and panelists alike. And so with that, let me hand it off to Atra for the first question.
Okay. Chapter 11, question 1. Why do you think there continues to be disagreement in the field about the validity of repressed memories? Hi, Bart. I see your hand. Oh, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, I'm still muted. Okay. Hi. Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. Oh, by the way, my name is Bart Ford. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Pharmacology and Physiology at Oklahoma State University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm part of a Center for Integrative Research on Childhood Adversity, or CIRCA. And I study the way that adversity and trauma and things like depression and mood disorders affect the immune system. And so I'm closer to the immunology side than I really am on the clinical or psychology side, but that's sort of my background and expertise. But I still found this really interesting, and particularly this question here, because I grew up, in the age of Jerry Springer and Sally Jesse Raphael and these sort of talk shows that would bring on, sort of the craziest cases that they could think of. And little did I know that there's this hot scientific debate going on about dissociative amnesia and repressed memories and false memories, and whether these things exist and can be used in a court of law. And so in these chapters, I think that van der Kolk really sort of makes a really good case for repressed memories as being valid. And I tend to lean towards that too, but I think that it's important to realize that this is a real undecided debate in the science. And when I was looking into this and preparing for this discussion, I was really surprised at some of the opinions that are out there. It seems like almost a really sort of toxic debate, where it seems like it's the believers versus skeptics, and they're both calling each other science deniers and stuff. And to me, that's not really helpful. I think that what the science should focus on is maybe the coexistence of these things and better empirical ways to distinguish between something that might be a false memory and something that might just be a repressed memory. And then that way, you can foster trust in the system and trust in the science. So I think that there's a lot of disagreement just because there's a long history and there's evidence on both sides for this, and that there's probably coexisting theories for it. So those are my thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you say that there's disagreement in the field of validity because of the long-standing history between the two. I know for me, when I was reading it, the fact that when the case was appealed, that there were 100, right, people that supported, that's a big number.
Yeah.
To say, well, actually what he's saying is true about repressed memories. So really interesting. I hear that it's a long-standing history as to why and how that can contribute.
Yeah, and important to realize, 100 people, 100 experts signed something saying that, this might not be valid as legal evidence. And, they're not on the payroll of ExxonMobil denying climate change. These are scientists working in their field that have legitimate reasons for believing what they believe. So
believe what they believe. Yeah, I hear you. Thank you, Bart. Christina, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. My opinion is that the disagreement comes from the fact that we live in a very scientific and objective culture, that repressed memories can't really be reproduced and objectively measured. So the objective culture doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, that's that. We can't put it in a box, right? So we'll just sort of say this about it. I hear that too. It's definitely has a cultural factor that is involved in this too. Brooke, hi, I see your hand.
Hi, I'm Brooke. I am a clinical supervisor specializing in medications for opiate use disorder. And I just wanted to acknowledge what Bart said and what Christina said about what the disagreements coming from both there being kind of two camps and it being subjective and us having a hard time understanding that, objectively. And I think that also a disagreement is that sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so before you can experience that subjectively, sometimes it's very difficult to understand be in the belief camp. So I think that's a lot of where one of the disagreements come from, because you can be in one camp until you have an experience of a different camp.
Yeah, I know as a trauma survivor, it makes complete sense to me, right? That I would sort of disassociate in order to survive. And then if I have some sort of trailhead or trigger happening, then that memory that was repressed, oh yeah, that's because it talked about that the memories for that gentleman didn't start coming back until he had started hearing about other people who were abused, right? So that for me as a trauma survivor lands. So I know what camp I'm in. Mm-hmm. Eli, I see your hand.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eli Rangel. I am a first-generation immigrant to the States from Mexico. I'm a paralegal in Dallas, Texas. And I was curious. I reread the chapter and know that there was 100 people 100 professionals that said, hey, you know what? There's no validity to it. But I don't know if anybody knows in here, was there other professionals that said, hey, this is something that's real, this is something that does have merit?
Yeah, there were in the book, he talks about how there was evidence, right? That he's done research and that there was evidence that this has been longstanding. And so I think that goes to Bart's comment about the history, right? There's now this sort of divide because it's been thought of this way for so long. And now what we're seeing in the science now shows us this. And then there's that subjective piece that Christina was mentioning. So, yeah. Yeah, great question. Dr. Keisha, I'll have you as the last one.
Thank you. Okay, I think I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I love the way the conversation is going, and since we're doing introductions, my name is Dr. Keisha. I am the CEO of Dr. Keisha Cares, coaching and consulting. And I love this topic because in my coaching, I come from a trauma-informed lens. And within my consulting, I'm a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. So I often deal with trauma, whether it's racial trauma, social trauma. There's a whole thing in the professional and the coaching space. And Christina, for me, really hit the nail on the head when we talk about why there is this division. And the book talks about it as well, in the sense of trauma can't be replicated in a lab. And furthermore, when you think about the participants who are being studied, if they come from a cultural background where what goes on in this house stays in this house, how often are they, or how able are they, if they are in that rare category of individuals who can even remember what happened, feel safe? I know with my coaching clients, it takes years, sometimes months of them, first of all, being around me, observing me, seeing that I'm consistent before they even decide to sign up and become a client or sit down with me for a coaching session. And then it takes sometimes several sessions before we can even scratch the surface of something adjacent to their trauma. So if you remove relationship and put someone who just signed up for a study or was asked to be in a study, and they're in a lab or they're in a neutral setting with someone they may not know, let's not think about the other aspects of let's not forget about socioeconomic status, race, class, any intimidation that may occur due to education levels or perceived education levels. And then think about how objective is the research that we're actually able to get when we try to study trauma, because it is such an elusive topic. And so when I think about why the disagreements are there, because for those who are the gatekeepers and want to stay true to the necessity of strong scientific evidence, it is hard to hold that standard of peer-reviewed science when it comes to a topic as deeply profound and complex as trauma. But it is no less true. And so I do think we have to be so cautious, gentle, and aware of why it's so important to treat people's memories, whether it's dissociative amnesia, whether it's a repressed memory, or if someone is teetering the line between a false memory, that we have to be sensitive, because it's so easy to worsen the trauma based on how we treat someone's truth.
Yeah, I agree. So easy to worsen the trauma based on how we interpret someone's truth. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Ronnie, I'll pass the next question off to you.
Yeah, those words from Dr. Keisha just kind of reverberates in my soul. So thank you for that, Dr. Keisha. And just the idea that you can't measure something easily, but doesn't make it any less true, is something that we all need to take away. And with that, let me read some of the comments in the YouTube chat. Arthur, hey, welcome. Arthur has been with us for the last couple of sessions, and Arthur, you should come and be a panelist if this is something you're so passionate about. But Arthur says, I think that denial has to do with the disagreement of repressed memories despite the irrefutable evidence. I also think it has to do with past tests of implanted falsified memories being conducted on non-traumatized individuals. As the author noted in the book, in order to understand a genuinely traumatized mind, you have to study an actually traumatized person. The brain activity, physiological reactions, and emotional responses of someone with firsthand trauma compared to implanted memories vastly differ, as concerned in one of the chapters. Wow, Arthur, very insightful comments. And with that, let's go to question 2 and see what author and the panelists have to say about that. So question number 2, in what ways might we increase society's knowledge about memory, dissociation, amnesia, and reenactments? And we have a couple of panelists here who have thoughts on this. Annie, let's begin with you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Yeah, I think the simple answer is a one-word answer, and that's education. Um, and in that education, I believe that we need to normalize so much of this. I think that trauma is so pathologized and so polarizing to our culture, and some people understand it and some people don't. That educating about the science behind the brain, everything that Dr. Vanderkolk teaches in the book, the science of the brain and why the brain does what it does when traumatized and how that plays out later in our life, and really just teaching people about that. I remember first learning that my thinking brain goes offline when I'm triggered by something that seems like a threat. And it made my whole life make sense. And I'm an RN. I'm a medically trained person, and I learned that well into my career, and it changed my perspective of myself and other people and how they react to trauma. And I think, Dr. Keisha said some words that I think are just incredible in regard to this question as well. And she said, cautious, gentle, and aware. And I think when we have grace and compassion for people and where they are in their knowledge, we can then approach them knowing that pretty much everybody on the planet has some level of trauma, and that even talking about trauma could be traumatizing to them. And so not just blasting everyone we know with this knowledge, not just handing everyone this book, although I'd love to do that, but that we really approach each situation to educate people in a way that we know would be received in a safe way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love how Annie you're describing it as how you answer it as first the obvious one, which is education, but really you dig a little bit deeper into the approach and coming that in a positive way, in a way that's actually helpful. So we want to do that as compassionate carers. Let's see what other panelists have to say, and let me welcome back Anna Radika. Welcome back, Anna Radika.
Hello, it's so nice to be here. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Achra. It's amazing to be back here. Yeah, I just want to say I agree with what Dr. Keisha said, what everybody has said, about Annie said, the education and normalizing it. I think too, just also going back a little bit into a previous chapters, I felt like it's also removing that catch-all of mental health and, trying to say, oh, this is this little thing and this little thing and this little thing, as opposed to seeing the whole person, and what they need and what their individual situation is. And also, what really struck me was the part when Julian says that he was embarrassed at feeling what he was feeling because normally he's so strong. And I think it's really important to remove the stigma around vulnerability being a weakness. It's that feeling, any emotion you have, if it's not normal in society, or if it's not considered strength, big, put on your big girl panties. What is that? I'm feeling an emotion. You telling me this is not helpful. Or even things like boys don't cry, that just is one of those things that used to really upset me, because it's like you're just teaching children from a really young age to suppress what they're feeling. And, it doesn't matter if it's not trauma, what they're feeling is valid, and the more you can allow them to speak. So I do think that we've got to create safer spaces for people to speak what they're feeling. Just that, for me, like something that's safe, where they can trust the person they're speaking to. And what Dr. Keisha was saying about some of her patients taking, or her clients taking weeks, months, years, even just being with her before they could even begin to unravel stuff. I've had the same thing with my clients. Some of them can trust immediately. Some of them, it just takes, there's so much going on. There's so much. And I love the later question about culture as well. The culture has so much to do with how we relate and how we express, and how, if we're even allowed to. And I think that that's just really crucial for me. There's the safety and the decharging some of these words that we use.
Yeah. Removing the stigma is necessary to increase the knowledge that we have. And that goes a long way by um, approaching people with humility, as we just spoke about, but also creating a safe space once people are there, right? Once they're ready to engage, how can we increase their propensity to be vulnerable? It's a lot of times it's modeling it out, sharing our own experiences with dissociation or amnesia, um, and being comfortable with ourselves in our own skin. Well, let me go to another panelist and see what her thoughts are. T, how about you? What do you think?
Well, hello there. My name is Tiana, and everyone calls me T. I teach emotional freedom technique tapping to mental health professionals, school mental health professionals, teachers, and foster parents. And I just want to be a voice of joy here and echo what the panelists have talked about, in that the message is getting out, and it's through education. I've been training, I shifted over from clients to I teach CEU credits for the foster parents have to get CEUs. It's so exciting. The foster parents read Bessel van der Kolk's book. Okay. The trauma, well, at least in Ohio, they do. Now I train all over the country, but in Ohio, I only train this is the only place I train foster parents. But nationally, the message is getting out there. I just did a training for Head Start, and in my PowerPoint is a slide, and it's Dr. van der Kolk's book. And I get so many people now raising their hands. If we get this message to these children, and what's interesting is when I teach the Head Start teachers, guess who they teach? The parents. And guess who the parents teach? The children. And it just keeps going. So all I can say, be a voice of hope, is my message is I teach all over the country, but I really try to get into the Head Start teachers and let them be spread the news. So one more thing on that is, and the pushback is, the teacher will arrive when the student is ready. So times people aren't ready to hear this message, and they glaze over, and they actually have like names for me, like get the loon off the stage when I've done it for the general public. But they will come around because the schools are bringing it out. It's a very common topic now. So that's all I wanted to let you know, is it's getting out there. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, T. Just to encourage you, one man sows, another man reaps, right? So you keep planting that seed, and somewhere along the line, somebody's gonna get it. They're gonna get it, and it might be their own kid who actually says the same thing. They're like, "Wait a minute, where did I hear that from?" Oh,
I know, but we all have, we have our families. There is no prophet in the neighborhood. Okay, you can try to tell your kids, your friends, anybody, and they'll sometimes look at you as crazy, especially when you start talking about tapping. But the teacher will show up when the student's ready. So we just have to, keep plugging along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one of the things I do is a lot of work overseas, and task shifting is so important. Use fancy term for just saying, get everybody involved, right? Whether it's the teachers, the parents, even the people in the local church or synagogue, or wherever, you worship. Those are the natural community leaders. So embrace the people who are already there, who've been taking care of that population for the longest time, for generations, and get them to be more trauma informed. So wonderful. Let me see if there's any comments coming on YouTube. Atra, do you see anything on there?
Yes, there's a lot of talk here. Zeph says, this issue is divisive only if we approach it from the lens of punitive justice. If we have to place blame on someone who harms people before we can start to protect other people from them, we must sacrifice unknown numbers of victims to them before we do something to stop it. If we approach our world from the idea that justice must be restorative, we can begin protecting potential victims and healing existing victims as well as perpetrators. And there was a lot of agreement in there. And T. Sui says, normalization and broad education of as much of the population as possible. There are 100+ of us here, meaning right now on the YouTube, but it is a drop in the bucket of the number of people who need to be open to learning about trauma. And Avian Ryan says, in our polarized society these days, it is a challenge to educate society. Perhaps a series of respectable discourse on the subject being available with perspectives from all sides would help. And there's continual discussion about hope and education and being trauma informed and what that actually looks like. So
Thank you for that, Asha. And actually, I don't know if there are any more comments from the panelists. I saw one hand that was up and it's gone down. So perhaps that was raised by mistake. And we'll just move on to the next question. Oh, actually, we have one handed. Ana Radika, you've got the last word on question number 2.
I think, what T was saying was absolutely right. And, I really do think that so many of these questions are interrelated, which is fabulous because I'm hearing answers that could work with anywhere. But definitely, I think that we have to also take it. I loved what T said about no profits on the block. We've got to take it into homes and just make it normal. Just normalize it. Normalize the tapping, the EFT, things like Reiki, things like art, art or movement, or there's so many things out there that people can do. Because I feel like there's also the stigma around going to a counselor, going for therapy. People don't want to admit it. And it's like, okay, can we give them alternatives to actually find that support and, just have that idea of there's more people supporting me here. It's like we were talking about, it takes a village. It does take a village. It does mean that you need to have support around you that is nurturing, that is trustworthy. And it just everything that everybody has said today.
I love that, Ana Radika. And, it reminds me, there was one time one of my clients, I was doing informed consent and I was describing the process. And she said, how is what you do any different from being a good brother in Christ? And I'm like, technically nothing. It's just that most people don't do what they say that they should do or prescribe to do. And so having the parents bring home the things that they learn from these classes, whatever educational constructs we put in place, and start putting it into practice with their own children, that's where you get real communities growing together, healing together, moving forward together. And it's what they should have been doing anyway. It's what we should all be doing. And I do all my expressive arts work with my kids. I know that some of the pioneers in the psychology field actually did experiments on their own kids, and they said, "Oh, this works," because and all of us who are in the audience who are parents, that you've learned so much from parenting your kids, and so if you have lessons learned from that, teach all of us as well. There's also a question in the YouTube chat. Let me invite Dr. Keisha. Dr. Keisha, you wanna read out the question that was placed in the YouTube chat and then give your thoughts on that?
I don't have the YouTube chat in front of me, so if you'd be happy to read it, I'd be more than glad to partner along with you and then answer. If we can work together, let's go.
Sure. I think the question is, how do you describe what trauma-informed is?
Yeah, so shameless plug for the Trauma Research Foundation, because I have taken your traumatic stress certification course twice. I took it 7 months ago and I'm in it now. And that is why I say trauma informed, because in addition to my doctorate degree in education, I have taken several certifications in coaching, but in trauma, because it is so deep and I keep seeing it in my clients, I have taken the time to go into in-depth graduate level study, which is what that certification course is. And I'm learning from Dr. Bessel, Kolk, and the array of great minds that he brought to that certification. So when I say trauma informed, that's like a low key flex that I really know what I'm talking about, and a not so humble brag that, I'm official. When we're having this conversation, I'm not just telling you what I heard or limiting my experience to my anecdotal experiences or just my narratives, though those are powerful. in my responsibility as a coach, I can't allow myself to stop there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also a graduate of the traumatic stress studies course, right? I can imagine wanting to go at it again just because the conversations we have with the lecturers themselves are so worth it, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not just about listening to the didactic discussions, but also being to get in there with a peer group of dozens of people sometimes, and throwing out the questions and hearing the responses and engaging with one another. And that actually is a wonderful way to be trauma informed, right? Because every person comes to the table with their own trauma stories.
That part.
And how do you put it into practice? That's the tough part.
And Dr. Bessel, I mean, I've had some sessions where he's teaching and he'll say something and it will completely explode my whole perspective because he's touched on something I experienced and didn't even understand the depth of it. Like in one of his talks, he talked about how people who are traumatized are conditioned to take care of the needs of others. So they then often professionally go into careers like education and things of that nature, or social type service positions. And that really blew my mind because I'm like, how much of my career path was shaped by trauma and I didn't even realize it. And so like I needed a week. I needed a week before I got back on there and signed up for another one of the sessions. And they release this content every Monday. So taking it the second time, I am not only able to take in the information on a deeper level, you're absolutely right. I'm far more prepared for the live discussions and even the spaces I've created to support anyone else that's in the cohort with me.
Yeah. Walking alongside each other. In my faith background, we have a proverb called, it says, walk with the wise and become wise. A companion of fools suffers harm. So if you want to be a wise counselor, a good parent, a strong citizen, or member of community, you go to these events and you figure out what trauma informed is. You don't be afraid of the stigma. You don't be afraid of what other people will say. You're a loon on the stage. No, you're basically becoming educated and you're giving it to everybody else. Let me get another comment from Dr. Rebecca.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that and talk about what it means to be trauma informed in the school setting. As a school psychologist, one of my passions is really educating educators on what it means to be trauma informed and to create a trauma informed environment. And so what that entails is teaching educators about what exactly trauma is and how it impacts learning and development. And then because of what we know about that, then what do we do about it in the school setting? We create policies and procedures that are sensitive to students who have experienced trauma. And then also we become responsive. So we create a culture at our school, in our buildings, that is a safe and supportive environment so that all children can flourish. But we're developing and implementing universal precautions. So we don't necessarily have to screen every child to know if they have experienced trauma or not. We put these universal precautions in place that allows all students to benefit from those resources.
Wonderful, Dr. Rebecca. My wife works in the school system in New York City, so I have a special place in my heart for all educators. So thank you for that. I also see, speaking of education, Heaven is back. Heaven, you're a student, right?
Yes. I was actually going to mention that's something that I've seen like firsthand in school. I'm in college now, but I'm in a university where most people that go here, like they didn't go to the same schools that I went to. So they, went to private schools, they got the tutors, they have the extra resources and stuff like that. But one thing that I noticed, even before I even knew anything about trauma, and it made me get interested in it, is there were some kids in special ed classes that did not belong there. like they didn't. They had really no learning disability, but they reacted in ways that, maybe the average kid didn't react. And I think that, like, in general, we place so much value on behavior in education when they're more separate than like we give them credit for. Like, I shouldn't have an A just because I'm quiet. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, like, that's a factor. I think it should still be a factor. But I think we place maybe too much value on that. And I don't want to say, because I do still think that there's value in, you know, separating certain kids from other kids, right? To an extent, I think that we do it too much. And I've just seen, like, for example, my little brother wasn't like me. Like, he just had a different personality. He reacted to trauma in a different way than I did. So I just shut down, and that kind of got me through life. And I excelled in, educational environments. But he didn't. You know what I mean? He lashed out, but he was smarter than me. I just tried harder, and so I just I really don't. I'm not gonna lie. I really don't know what we could do exactly to change that. But I've seen it, a lot, and it's sad. So
Yeah.
so I guess, I do definitely. Sorry, I do agree with what Dr.
Rebecca?
Rebecca was saying. Just as far as educating teachers, because a lot of them just don't know how to. They have so much on their plate already. You know what I mean? So I don't know if there could be like a certain type of certification that we could bring in, because uh, those kids do need attention, but it's hard to know what to say or what to do. So
yeah, and I think having you did a wonderful job of modeling out your response, right? Because it's not just about the teachers educating the parents educating the kids, right? It's also about peers educating the peers. The students teaching the other students is much more likely to take root. And as a grassroots person, I believe so strongly in getting the young people involved, and to such an extent that they become the leaders. You're not going to listen to anybody more than your best friend, right? So if you're 15, if you're 20 years old, you're going to spend the time with the people that really have your ear and are in your heart. And so getting you to speak up about your brother, that's really important. Other people should stand up for their family members and advocate for other students. That's how you actually increase our knowledge of each other, having the people speak on behalf of people. Let me ask Dr. Rebecca, do you have any responses to what Heaven said?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Heaven, for bringing up, the idea of, having some kind of certification or for schools. That's something that is currently a huge passion of mine. And part of what I do is provide training to schools. In fact, the elementary school that I worked in for a number of years, we had so many students who experienced trauma, and it was chronic. And so we decided that we needed to make our school a trauma responsive school. And so a lot of that training was, like I said, not just for staff to understand what trauma is and how it affects learning and development, but also the big piece that we stress is, Heaven stated, teachers have so much on their plates. And so, we have to be so sensitive in not making it just another thing that we do to put on their plates, but really we stress that the most important thing that you can do as an adult in the life of this child is your positive relationship with that student. And I often give them this metaphor that, you have a superpower as an adult, just by nature of a positive relationship with that student, that you can impact the adult outcomes of their childhood experiences.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it kind of reminds me of when people say the best thing you do for your kid is to be a good dad. I'm sorry, the best thing you can do for your kids is to be a good husband. Or, obviously, if you're a woman, you can be the best wife possible. But being a great teacher to other kids teaches the kids how to treat each other. So that's a wonderful concept. Let me get the last response here, Debbie. I know you've been waiting for a long time, and I am eager to hear what you are saying. Go ahead.
I agree with everybody. Hello, I'm from Greece. I live in Greece, and we're not trauma informed. We're just getting there. And I am trying to, introduce people to all kinds of methods and new therapies, because people here are really, for some reason, ignoring, heavily ignoring trauma work. And we really need it, because the historical trauma that we've suffered here in Greece is huge. So one thing that I've noticed that I want to stress is, yes, it's so important to be trauma informed and to introduce the work to schools, but at the same time, I think that we need to be very careful with the words, because there's so many new words, this language, the trauma language, that's so useful. At the same time, it can become so dangerous, because I've noticed that people that are just getting to know about trauma here in Greece, they're using the vocabulary in a way that is actually making them stay away from their experience. So the experience is much more important, and sometimes maybe avoiding to use the words, avoiding the language sometimes, before we make sure that they understand, viscerally what we're talking about, because I think it's really dangerous, all these language, even though it's so useful. So yeah, that's what I wanted to stress.
Yeah, I mean, language is so powerful, and it's so intricately tied to cognition and development, and we have to get it right. Otherwise, we're talking different languages. Um, so, Heaven, I see your hand up. Do you have a final response to all this that you've kind of set off?
Yes, and I was actually looking at YouTube chat, and I agree with that, Jean. Especially that really spoke to me. That part when you said, "You can't learn if you don't feel safe," right? But I didn't really understand this as much when I was younger. But teachers are people; they're just people. Like they're not robots. And we were actually learning in one of my classes today about how praise is not always a good thing, right? So if I praise somebody for being smart, and I saw this firsthand, like I remember I had all my friends were not the people who were in my classes, because they separated as, like the smart kids versus the other ones. You know what I mean? And that was messed up. I feel like it's messed up. Because when I would talk to my friends, they would reflect, even though nobody told them they're stupid, you know what I mean? But you treat them like they're stupid, right? Because you're praising them. Maybe, let's say I turn an assignment and I don't work hard on it. But my teacher tells me this is a great assignment. But when you think about why are they praising people for mediocre work? Because they believe that that's the best that they can do. So if you don't push, if you don't, I think there has to be some type of standard, you know what I mean, for work, and for even praise. Because, I remember my friends would tell me all the time, like, oh, you're just smart. I was like, no, I just believe that even if I'm not, even if I don't feel smart, even if I'm not getting good grades at first, I just believe. And I don't know where that came from, but like, I just always believed that I could get better. And I think that texts like the body keeps the score should be taught to everyone, you know what I mean? So that they see, like, okay, it's one thing for somebody to tell you, but to have the evidence of, okay, this is how my brain reacts to trauma, this is how I'm affected by it. Just to have the evidence, to have someone just sit there, just simply just sit there and talk to you and tell you, it has nothing to do with your level of intelligence, teach them about growth mindsets. What Alyssa said was a really good point about, top, bottom up processing versus top down. What you perceive is affected by what you experience. So, yeah.
That's absolutely right. And even as having you speaking, I kind of think about when I was in school, in seventh grade or whatnot, and you had people from junior achievement come in and teaching business things and whatnot. But we don't have, at least when I was in school, we didn't have trauma survivors coming in and say, hey, you know what? I grew up in this neighborhood and it was really rough, and this is how I kind of got through it. Right. I think that would be so helpful. And we should have more survivors, more people who've been struggling, continue to struggle, come in and be role models. Let me get a very last quick comment from Annie. Annie, I know you have been waiting as well.
Thank you, Ronnie. I feel like when I said the word education, I popped the cork on a champagne bottle, and I think we're all just catching on to this idea. But very quickly, I worked 14 years as a school nurse, and I will say that 85% of what I treated was trauma, mental health, and our kids in schools are craving connection. So those of us who study trauma, and I know many of us have day jobs and we cannot do this, but if you have even 2 hours in your week to volunteer at a local school and go in and just create relationships with kids, our schools are desperate for people to come in, and our kids are just craving connection. And we know that connection is the opposite of addiction. And so when we do that, we are not only helping heal trauma, but we are preventing future things that come from trauma. So
yeah, absolutely.
And there are schools in every neighborhood. So
yeah, and absolutely. And even think about Sunday schools, right? People go to Sunday school and they say, oh, you have problems? No, you need to pray more. That's all you need to do. And it's like, well, it also matters how you pray and what you do after you pray. So you do together, or you do isolate in a little closet by yourself and you're just alone, right? So you have to do a lot of education in every sphere of life that we have. So thank you for that.
Connection and relationship building. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really about the community doing it together. So wow, we have it's just a fantastic author, has great insight. And then I want to thank Andy Kolk, who was the one who actually asked this question on YouTube. So we have a couple of all-stars in the YouTube audience, Arthur with the insights and Andy with the questions. So everybody get more involved. I'm going to hand it back to Atra for the next question. But thank you again for everybody's contributions. Atra.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great conversation so far. So we'll move on to the next question. Can you think of any examples in your own life or the lives of individuals who you know that relate to any of the concepts discussed in this chapter, in chapter 11? So I'll start with T.
Wow, that last conversation, it took everything in me not to raise my hand 4 times. I always work with my, when I'm tapping and I'm teaching the social workers, the counselors, or the teachers, I always have a piece for introspection, because you didn't become, I always say, you didn't become a social worker by accident, right? What's your own stuff? And we talk a lot about, here in this group, we talk about reaching out, creating a relationship with another person. What's going on here? Okay. If you show up as the best version of yourself, you can help a lot of people. If you have your own things and you haven't looked at them, you want to connect with another person, but is it really as deep and I don't want to say spiritual as it could be if you have your own things that you haven't worked through? So when I train in tapping, a lot of people get triggered because they start feeling feelings and they realize they have their own things to work on. So I just wanted to share that. But the story I have is this. Before I started tapping professionally with trainers, teaching teachers and social workers and that, I worked with clients. and you look at people engaged in reenactments of traumatic experience without awareness, when you think of that, I cannot tell you how many times I didn't work with trauma people. I didn't want to deal with trauma. I went through my own. Thank you very much. I do, tapping coaching for careers and that sort of thing. And I have to say 80% of the people who came to me had a trauma. It's like, oh, great. But the point is, I had a client, and she has no awareness of this. And when I think of reenactment, I think of implicit bias. Why do people get triggered by other people? So I had a client who came to me for anxiety, stress relief, panic attack. She didn't want to go on medication. And what she ended up doing through tapping is realizing it wasn't too much work. She was 60 years old. She'd been doing the job for 30 years, whatever. Why now is she getting triggered? And it was somebody who was triggering her, somebody who joined her team, who reminded her of an abuser. So she would actually be in a meeting, she said, and she never put it together till we were tapping, that she would feel panic when the door closed and latched in the executive meeting. She heard that click and she didn't know what happened. Her body started feeling it, right? So she was reenacting her, she didn't fight, she froze. And a couple times she had to leave and go to ER. So I just we think about reenactment on a big level and big trauma, but what about the small T's? All day long, people are triggering and they're acting specific ways. Here was this lady treating this executive differently, and it had nothing to do with him. It had to do with her reenacting her trauma, right? And it's all of us have situations like that where I always say to my people, I say, if somebody's bugging you and they're not bugging the other 7 people in the room, maybe you might want to look at what is it with this person and that dynamic. So that's all I wanted to share, is that it was without awareness. She had no idea. And then she had shame and guilt because she was treating this gentleman differently when he didn't even do anything. And that's all. I'll pass now. Thank you.
Thank you, T. That reminds me of the story earlier of the husband and wife that both went through an acute traumatic incident, and one responded one way and another responded another way. And maybe other people in the boardroom are not responding to this person the way she is, but maybe they're having their own response too, right? Like trauma is, as we know, as we talk about with what Bessel has said and Dr. Kapoor has said, like, it is the wounds we carry. Right? That is what trauma is. It is the wounds we carry, how we respond to what's happening. And yeah, those body sensations were just, oh, wait, what? So we have to work through that. So I hear that, of working on our own.
And she had no idea. And to think that this is what it is. I look at all of us. Why am I having a problem with my daughter or my sister-in-law or whatever? And it's not usually something with the childhood. She was ready to quit a career, because she didn't even know she had this trauma until she went to that place. So that's a shame. And you look at a lot of people in the profession who secondary trauma. I mean, I do deal a lot with that secondary trauma. It's really prevalent. So they can't get social workers and Head Start teachers to make it past 5 years because of all the trauma they have to deal with. And they're getting triggered, and they came up through the ranks, right? So there's this whole cycle here.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the last question, right? How can we help? We can maybe provide more support, maybe more resourcing, learn exactly how those people in those areas need and receive resourcing in order to continue and make it past those 5 years. Alyssa, I see your hand next.
Sorry. Hi, yes, I'm Alyssa, and I'm a survivor of many things. I am a somatic practitioner. I get people out of their heads through the body, and I am also a Marine Corps veteran wife. So these were, I was in tears almost this whole section, and I doubt I will get through this answer without breaking down. But one of the parts that hit me so viscerally was when he mentioned the quote from All Quiet on the Western Front. And it says he spoke for an entire generation, and he's still speaking. But I am aware that I, without realizing it, have lost my feelings. I don't belong here anymore. I live in an alien world. I prefer to be left alone, not disturbed by anybody. They talk too much. I can't relate to them. They are only busy with superficial things. And this was in 1929. And for me, it was the example of my own life is how many other Marines have lied on my couch, waking up from night terrors. How many Marines and military members that we know personally that have sought out help. And, you know, resources are limited and everyone, you know, they do the best we can. But now that we know more, we need to do more. And, you know, people who have not stopped fighting their wars. And I can't tell you how many funerals I've been to by my husband's side of people who just weren't given these resources. And it's so inspiring that we're starting to see, like, because the old way is not working. Like, with this book with real life examples, like, we're literally just scratching the surface of these traumas. And, you know, my husband is all about business. He used his GI Bill, and our big goal someday is to create this
Let me give it a second.
After they die, and what can wait, and we want to in all sorts of modalities. You know, there is a place for talk therapy and pain. You know, I view psychotic medication as kind of that first level of, like, let's get the pain under control, but don't let it be the be all end all. Don't pull people off of these and be like, oh, you're cured, and, you know, then they're taking their own life a few weeks later. And, you know, just like I said, the science is catching up for this kind of stuff. And I'm so excited that there are groups like this and we are having discussions like this. And yeah.
I think you made it through great. Thank you for contributing to that. As someone who spent most of her time growing up on military bases all across the United States, I never once had anyone speak to me about trauma or what that is or anything like that. And I think providing resources in the military that are more education based about trauma is really important and could go a long way to help some of those Marines you're talking about. Right? So thanks.
Well, and one more thing, like, that's like, I didn't get to, so it's called Valhalla Can Wait. And like I said, we want to bring in these modalities. We want to bring in the community aspects. When we were in, I will say the military is great about bringing concerts and marriage retreats with other military families. Like, and that's why I think so many of them, and it says, like, they're just so disconnected. They feel like they can't relate. And, you know, bringing, you know, they're physical beings, so, you know, and they get out and they don't have that, but, you know, what does it look like for hikes together? Like, what does it look like for, I literally vision like primal dance chants on a beach around a fire. Like, what does that look like for people who have never been allowed to process those things? So, yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing your dream come to fruition. Valhalla Can Wait sounds like a pretty awesome name. Dr. Keisha, I see your hand up.
Thank you. And what an honor to come after Alyssa. Thank you for bringing your vulnerability and your truth as you shared. And that's one of the things I love about Dr. Van der Kolk's work, because he has been one of the frontline people advocating for somatic uses of processing this through the movement of the body and bringing in perspectives from yoga, Pilates to Tai Chi, and bringing in all of the Eastern and alternative medicines and thought practices that people probably wouldn't acknowledge as valid. And what I love about the somatic therapies is that it creates a space for the aunties, the uncles, the people who have the community knowledge, who understand movement in the body, the dancers, the singers, and it creates community and says your knowledge is valid. So when I hear someone speak from a voice like Alyssa's, I am so proud to be a member of this community because there is no title requirement. Yes, I am Dr. Keisha, but anyone who is a expert who has walked through their own experience has room at my table. Right. And so, but that's not at all. I came here to answer the question. I want to go to the book real quick. Chapter 11, page 181. This was probably one of the most profound sentences in the chapter for me. Very short. Traumatized people simultaneously remember too little and too much. And when I think about the question in terms of examples in our own lives or the lives of individuals, that is such a profound truth in the sense of what you remember in your trauma memory. And I love that the chapter in chapter 12 as well goes deeper into your trauma narrative versus the ordinary story narrative if it wasn't traumatized. And your ability to understand that your trauma memory is firmly planted in your emotional brain. And so you can remember it so vividly, but the rational, relational part of your brain is not a part of that conversation, which is why there are gaps, which is why the story does not have a full narrative arc into it, right? But the chapter does end on this hope, page 183, end of page 182. If the problem with disassociation, and just for, our listeners, bring you to the table, disassociation is when we're talking about the isolation of memory. So if someone is disassociating, that means that they have split off that difficult memory and they are basically locking it away or subconsciously or consciously avoiding it. And there's a heavy cost to that, right? But the quote says, if the problem with disassociation is that locking away of thought, then the goal of treatment would be association, integrating the cut off elements of the trauma into the ongoing narrative of life so that the brain can recognize that that was then and this is now. And that, if you take nothing from anything we've said, that is the most important part about being healed from trauma, is the ability to live and remain and stay rooted in the now. So when you're triggered, if you're, like T was talking about with the tapping, when things come up, you can acknowledge that happened, but you can come back to the now. And I imagine the client she worked with, when she sees that individual and she's engaging with him, she stays in the now of their engagement and she doesn't time travel back to the person who abused her. And that is the powerful thing about healing from trauma. And oftentimes we get there through that movement. We often come back in that to connection by what the book talks about, releasing our body to participate and let go of what it's holding. Yeah, I'm done.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think you're really speaking to a lot of the after effects of trauma, right? The emotional after effects, the neurological after effects that trauma leaves on us, the relational after effects that we have from trauma. We know there's nothing that can be done about the trauma that someone has experienced in their life, but we can certainly in the present help them with the after effects and how in the present what affected them, what occurred back is affecting them now, and just really like creating those safe spaces we talked about earlier. Yeah, I hear that. Heaven, I see your hand, and then Christiane.
Yes. Well, I think that was a good point, by the way, Dr. Keisha. I really appreciate that. But you asked for a personal. Someone actually in the chats mentioned this. Let me see what their name was. Holstein. They said that they think trauma resides on a cellular level. And there's still so much research to be done on this. But just from personal experience, I have lupus, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's the autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks itself, so it can affect anything. So I actually just found out I have inflammation around my heart. But when I was around 12 years old, that's when I first got diagnosed. And so nobody knew it, you know, it's one of those diseases that's invisible. Like when someone breaks their leg, you can see something's clearly wrong. Okay, they need help. But with me, you know, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything about lupus. You know, I was getting tests done because like it just random stuff would just happen to my body, right? So one day I just wouldn't be able to bend my arm. You know what I mean? Or you know, I couldn't put my clothes on, stuff like that. And I finally got to see a rheumatologist, and the children's rheumatologist, she spent about 45 minutes with me and my parents. And she put me to the side and she was like, you know, I think it was triggered by stress. And I was like, you know, so, but I had no idea what stress was, you know what I mean? So, and I would, before I got diagnosed, no, there was no diagnosis for me. So I didn't know what was going on with my body. I just knew what I felt. And so I would go to the nurse, and since she couldn't see anything, I'm not blaming her, I'm not holding it against her for this, but since she could not see anything and she had no idea how my home life was, she basically was like, you're making it up. Like, stop coming to me. You know what I mean? And so I'm just mentioning this because I really don't know who's watching this. You know what I mean? I understand that there's a lot of educators. And I guess my main point that I want to say is it's important to, even if you can't see it, you know, it's important to educate yourself. Not even just, you know, not even just the teachers, just everyone in general, because you never know who you're interacting with and what they've been through and why they act the way they act. You know what I mean? So, that's my point.
Thank you. Thank you for the story of your lived experience. Right? I think that goes to Dr. Keisha's point earlier about, you know, it doesn't matter what letters are at the back of your name. It doesn't matter any of that stuff. As long as you have curiosity, compassion, there's a seat at the table, lived experience to discuss this, to function in connectedness and start to help people heal from these after effects of trauma. So thank you, Heaven, for sharing that. Christiane, you have the last comment on this, and then we'll go to you too.
So from a personal perspective, one of the things that's been happening just this evening for us in our home is that we're aware of traumatic event that happened 11 plus years ago, and we're working on healing that. But what still kind of astounds me is the idea that because it happened in a particular time and then we heal, what I'm becoming more and more aware of is the need to keep healing, to keep allowing myself to process the feelings, because I'm changing, I'm growing, I'm getting older. And even though I'm getting further away from when the event happened, it continues to trigger in the most inane conversations. We were just having a conversation about life insurance, and bang, before you know it, I'm back in that room 11 years ago being told that there's something wrong with my body and that's why things went wrong. And, you know, it can take your breath away. And, you know, I'm trained, I'm a narcissistic trauma-informed coach, I'm a brain spotting practitioner, I'm somatic, I know all of the steps, I know all of the techniques, I know all of the tools, and yet it's that moment when you just have your breath taken away from you because bang, it hits you and you kind of think, man, I'm doing all this healing and surely, you know, this shouldn't keep happening to me. But every time you enter a new phase of your life or you change jobs, you're going to be experiencing new events, new experiences, and they can trigger you. They can still trigger you. So I think it's really important that we continue to explain that healing is a journey. It isn't a destination. And I think we need to be aware and prepared almost for the fact that whilst you may feel really good right now and you feel you've done all of the work, there may still be work that needs to carry on in the future, and keep an eye out for that.
I think that's a good point, that there is no like, I've arrived, sunshine, rainbows, everything's great. I see in my own life, right? There's a constant, oh, I thought I was done with that. Where'd that come from? Oh, yeah, right. So, okay, let's have a conversation about this. So I hear that. Eli, I see your hand too. Thank you, Christiane.
Hello. I just want to piggyback on both of what Heaven and Christiane both said that both you have to educate yourself as well as share with those people around you your support system. But also that the healing is continuous. A small story would be that I have some of the amnesia mentioned in the chapter that I went through. I had a relationship that I was in. It ended suddenly, and I don't remember most of those years. I don't remember most of the whatever happened, the events that happened. My parents come up and say, "Hey, this happened," and I don't remember any of it. I read emails and I don't remember any of it. But what I connected with was both Heaven saying that you need to educate yourself as well as educate those around you. And with I've come to learn that healing is very much, you may think you're done, but you're not. And I get to a point to where when I first started with EFT, and I was ready for it. And I was like, yeah, I got this, and I'm done. And I felt so good about it. And then, months later, I got triggered, and I was like, oh wait, there's more to do. And then so I kept going. I was like, okay, maybe I need a little bit more. So then I kept educating myself. I kept reading. I kept buying books, and it just seems like such a long path, but a good path, if that makes sense. Because I know that I'm making progress. I know that I'm going to get there. I know that I'm going to heal eventually, even though it may take a while. But it's going to take a little bit. But it's just continue healing, continue to push through. Pretty much, it's good to just be persistent.
Yeah, I like that. Persistence. That's actually one of my modalities in internal family systems. It's a component of self. So when we understand in that modality that self ends up, sort of hiding away because it's not safe, and people don't even know really who they are until they have a safe space where self energy can emerge. And it takes persistence. It does. It really does. Thank you, Eli. We have to move on, but Debbie, I'm going to give you the last final thought and then pass it over.
Yeah, it's going to be real quick. So I'm thinking, yeah, it doesn't end, but all of a sudden you realize that, so what if it comes back? I have space for it. And I think that's healing. Healing is, having space for whatever reoccurrence, whatever happens. I'm not faulty. I'm not broken because it's coming back. I have more space before it's coming out. It's a great excuse or a reason for me to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's yeah.
Yes, Debbie. Yes. I say all the time when I'm moderating these things, if I had a book or something, I'd slam it down. That's definitely one of those instances, right? So what? We're still working. We're still here. We're still taking on. Absolutely. Our parts have positive intents to keep us going. And how are we, that growth mindset? You're speaking to that growth mindset, Debbie. You really are. Thank you so much. Ronnie, I'll pass it over to you for anything on YouTube and our last question that we're going to be taking today.
Thank you, Atra. Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of great comments, and just the idea of growth not being a straight path, being much more circular. I actually, I tell my clients that it's like dancing. You're going back and forth. Sometimes you're moving a lot in one direction, you're coming back around, and it's just navigating that movement together, not by yourself, but with somebody else in tandem with you, and learning how to operate in that kind of partnership can be very therapeutic in itself. But I'm also reminded of one of my professors. His name is David Powelson, and he said that growth in obedience, or any kind of growth and healing, is actually like a person operating a yo-yo. So if you played with a yo-yo as a kid, it goes up and down, up and down. But eventually, if you are climbing a staircase, it always goes up and down, but the ultimate trajectory is up. And so that's the kind of image that I was really struck by. and encouraged by. So with that, let's go to the final chapter, chapter 12 that we're going to discuss today. We don't have that much time, so we're just going to do one final question. And I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to be said around this piece, which is about culture. And I think even earlier today, we talked a little bit about how culture is a very complex topic. It was just one line that one of our panelists threw out there about culture. But as a person who's trained in culture in many different dimensions, I want to know what the panelists have to say about how does culture shape the expression of traumatic stress? Very wide-ranging questions, as we have a lot of cultures represented here, intersectionalities. Let's start with Brooke. Brooke, what are your thoughts on this? Welcome.
Yeah, I super quick, and it just reiterates a lot of things that people have already said, but I think that the culture of acceptance shapes our expression of trauma. The more that we create a culture that this is safe to be vulnerable, and that it doesn't matter the letters behind your name or the education that you have. This is something that we are all experiencing and vulnerable to. It makes it safer to express our trauma and then ultimately heal from that.
Yes. Yeah. How traumatic stress is expressed to one another as we're discussing it is obviously going to be impacted by how we're raised, the communication patterns in our families of origin, and so forth. I wonder what the other panelists have to say about how traumatic stress is expressed in, whether it's somatic manifestations or, so many other different ways. Bart, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that speaking from American culture, that after undergoing some grief or some stress, it's often well, here's a week off of work to think about it, and now get back to work, and stuff, and we have this individualism that has been both good and bad for, again, American culture, I think. And part of that, I think what needs to be married to that is more compassion, because this individualism leads us to think, well, I've stood on my own 2 feet and I've dealt with, whatever thing it is. So when you see somebody on the street and you think, well, why don't they just, pick up themselves and move on from that? And so I think that is a very sort of negative thing about our culture, in that we can't see sort of past our own nose a lot of times as an expression. And so so I think that kind of forces people to just deal with things on their own, and instead of, as the other panelists have talked about, using this as a way to engage with other people and to grow and move on from things, and giving people the space that they need and the ability to express themselves in this way is very important. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that, Bart. Let me get a few more comments from some of the other panelists here. Christina.
Yes, thank you. The way I see it, culture shapes the expression of traumatic stress because it dictates what behavior is acceptable or unacceptable depending on the demographic you fall in. Like, for example, it's okay for a 2-year-old to throw a temper tantrum, not okay for a 52-year-old. Here in the US, I also see along gender lines where anger is more acceptable for men to express, but sadness is more acceptable for women to express. It reminds me of Heaven's comment earlier about how she and her brother both had similar trauma, but she was quiet and he lashed out. I wonder how much of that is because there's different behavior expectations for boys versus girls.
Yeah, certainly we're affected and we want people to know, but at the same time, we want to be culturally or socially acceptable. And so it's quote unquote okay for boys to be boys. And if the girl is traumatized, but she's quiet, nobody will really know. Um, and that's a shame. That's a shame that we fall into those molds. Anna Radika, how about you? What are your thoughts on this last question?
Yeah, so I had talked a little bit about it last previously. So I just want to say that I think that it's really important to everything everybody has said so far about this acceptance, compassion. It's just like, just allowing people to be themselves. But also, I really think that it's the isolation is a huge thing. The more we're isolated, the less compassion we can have. It's what Brett said. And I think that it's just time to make it like change what is normal. Let's normalize tapping, like T said, right? It's like just normalize tapping. I'm having an issue, I'm tapping, right? Or normalize the Reiki, which is like, oh, my heart is cutting, and let me just breathe. Just breathing, right? The hands on heart. Let me just breathe through this. It's like I just need a moment here. I think that we just really need to change the way we even look at what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's okay, what's not. Just flip the apple cart, change what is normal, and just start normalizing different ways of being in the world that is acknowledging where each person is at, and also acknowledging that everybody, what happens to you, Ronnie, affects me. Eventually it's going to affect me. It's going to ripple from you, and eventually it's going to reach me. And it doesn't matter that you're somewhere and I'm somewhere else. It's like the wings of the butterfly fluttering here cause a hurricane there. It's the same with our emotions. It's the same with everything that we're feeling. And we have to just make it like everybody's connected. That's everybody's connected.
Anna Radika, I'm going to do some butterfly tapping after this, and I'm hoping that it'll give you some breakthroughs. But for the last panelist, I'm going to give the last final word to Christiane. Christiane, I know you have a lot of good things to say, and you haven't shared that much today. So go at it, close us out. Oh, you're muted.
I think the thing for me about culture shaping the expression of traumatic stress that I'm experiencing the most at the moment is gratitude. I understand about gratitude and how it's important to be grateful, but from a trauma perspective, it can often feel very difficult to feel that you are able to hold space for yourself and find people that you can connect with to process the trauma that you have, when the expectation from a lot of society is that you ought to be grateful for what you have. And I find it really conflicting to have this gratitude and gratefulness whilst trying to recover from trauma. It's one that I struggle with regularly. So I understand the need to be grateful, and I'm working on gratitude, but that doesn't leave me a lot of space to work through my trauma.
Yeah, Christiane, I think those are so poignant a concept, right? Even when people pray, I tell them, yes, you start with adoration and praise, but you get to the supplication, you get to what you're really needing, and that's what we all want as parents, as teachers. We want the students and the children to say, "Hey, Dad, hey, teacher, thanks a lot for this, and this." Now, what would really help me get an A in this course would be, or this is how I'll really be able to contribute to the family. I want to hear that. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the panelists. Thank you for all the discussion. Thank you for the questions that came in today. Thank you for the insights that came through the YouTube audience. Thank you for everybody. And come back again next week. I'm going to hand it off to Emma for her to close us out with the final words and announcements. But I'm showing you a lot of gratitude. There you go.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. This brings us to close for our incredible and vibrant discussion today. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you to our amazing panelists for being a part of the TRF community, and to our virtual audience out there for your contributions, your thoughts, your insights, and for being present for this conversation. We hope that you'll join us for the remaining 2 sessions as we continue to discuss The Body Keeps the Score. We will meet again next week, March 23rd at 4 p.m. Eastern Time for our 5th episode to discuss Part 5, Paths to Recovery, chapters 13 through 20. Everyone who has registered for book club will receive an email with next week's YouTube link tomorrow. You can also find that information when you log into your TRF members account. If you're interested in applying to be a panelist, please fill out the questionnaire that has been dropped into the YouTube chat today. You will also find this in your next book club email and in your TRF members account. Participation in the panel enrolls you to be selected for the final panel with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk on March 30th. As we close out, I'd like to share 3 exciting upcoming events at the Trauma Research Foundation. For the 34th year, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and TRF will host the annual Boston International Trauma Conference, bringing together some of the world's most innovative leaders from the field of trauma, attachment, neuroscience, mindfulness, body-oriented work, and psychedelic studies. This live, virtual, and in-person event will take place May 17th through 20th, 2023. Tickets are on sale now with special early bird prices available until April 19th, and we hope that you will take this opportunity and register today. Second, the Traumatic Stress Studies Certificate Program that Dr. Keisha, I'm so grateful that she plugged for you guys, has launched its next cohort. Our intensive postgraduate level certificate program consists of 32 weeks of immersion into the fundamental issues necessary to become an expert clinician treating adults and children who suffer from traumatic stress. This is a self-paced online course with monthly live virtual Q&As with experts in the field of trauma. Registration for this cohort remains open until March 30th, so please take the opportunity to register today. Finally, our trauma-informed neurofeedback certificate program will launch its spring cohort on Monday, March 20th. The Trauma Research Foundation recognizes neurofeedback as one of the tools that can help to rewire a physiological system that has been dysregulated as a result of trauma. We invite licensed mental health or medical professionals to explore this high-level comprehensive certification. Please check out our website to learn more about these programs and events. Again, I can't say thank you enough to our panelists, new and returning. And thank you to our fantastic moderators, Achra Tarfa and Ronnie Ang, for guiding this discussion and for holding such a beautiful space for all of our contributions. And thank you to the TRF team who are all making this book club happen. We would love to hear about your experience as a virtual audience. Feel free to reach out and share any feedback with us at programs@traumaresearchfoundation.org. That is our general email. We would love to hear from you. And again, thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of whatever is left of your day, and that we will